AP wires, and it was, they the old machines, and they were cranking out bulletins and all urgents about what happened.
Right.
John Lennon, yeah, incredible.
Oh, you're on mute, Donnie. Or maybe he wants to.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we'd like to welcome you to BmoreNews.com, the news before the news, where we uncover the truth. We're being joined today by some phenomenal people. Let me go around the horn, and let's start with the ladies. Janet, let's start with you, and then we'll go to the gentlemen. Introduce yourself.
Buenos dias. Good morning. I'm Janet Arce, and I'm the founder of Fundación Arce in Baltimore City. And we cover everything. I don't know what else to tell you. From feeding the homeless to domestic violence, a special event like Christmas events. We also help people who are addicted, trying to get them into programs. We do Easter events. We do, everything. Everything. We feed the homeless. We also help with building homes. Not like let's say somebody was a victim of domestic violence and they lost their home and they're on the street. We try to find them places, and we furnish the place from food to anything that they need.
Okay, good stuff. China?
I'm China Boak Terrell, and I am the CEO of American Communities Trust. And we are working on putting small businesses into low-income communities as the way to make those neighborhoods viable, economically viable, and economically independent.
Okay. Well, let's go. And by the way, you are a lawyer, China?
I am. So I'm a lot of things, actually. So I am definitely a corporate lawyer, and I'm barred in 3 states. However, I'm not currently practicing because I'm leading this nonprofit, which I absolutely love. But I'm also a nonprofit developer. So I lead the development of the Baltimore Food Hub, which we've rebranded now as the Baltimore Pump House, but it's a $27 million project in a low-income Black and Brown community. We're super excited about what the project is doing and how it's like transforming things for residents. And the residents are a huge part of the leadership of that project. And so, in addition, I have a background in education, but I know Bob Daschle is coming up next, and I'm a corporate lawyer. That's what I'm trained as. But I had emergency open heart surgery and decided I wanted to spend the rest of my life and career building up communities and building up people.
Okay. Mr. DeShiel?
I'm Robert DeShiel. I've been a practicing attorney for 47 years in Maryland and in the District of Columbia and Pennsylvania. But that's my profession. That's not who I am or what I do. My real mission. I'm a truth seeker. My goal is to find the truth and then to promote it. That's what I do.
He's being modest today. Okay, John Rydell.
Yes, good morning. How's everybody doing? I have been a reporter for many, many years in Baltimore, 29 some years at WBFF-TV, the Fox affiliate in Baltimore, covering politics. Before that, I was at Maryland Public Television, worked in radio in Baltimore. And I remember covering William Donald Schaefer when he was mayor, and then went on to become governor. And of course, all the mayors and governors that followed, Kurt Schmoke, Martin O'Malley, and everybody else.
Good deal. So, John, tell us about the op-ed. You wrote an op-ed this week that appeared in Maryland Matters. Tell us about it.
Well, I wanted to just take a look at Brandon Scott coming into office. And, I think, as you mentioned, it is truly a thankless job. But keep in mind, think about all of the people that wanted to become mayor. It wasn't just Sheila Dixon or the Jack Young, other people. I mean, you had more than 20 candidates that ran. And so obviously there's a lot of prestige in becoming mayor, but you know what you're getting into. And these are very, very tough times. And, thinking about the outgoing mayor, Jack Young, those were very tough times, 18 or 19 months that he was mayor, and he came in and they had immediately, you had the problem with the ransomware that crippled the computer system and hurt the city services and whatnot. And then, of course, everyone has been ravaged by COVID. And in fact, I believe at this hour, the new mayor, Brandon Scott, is holding a news conference to update everybody on what's going on. And then I understand this afternoon at 2 p.m., he will also be taking part in a virtual news conference with all of the area county executives, which is very unusual. And they're very traumatized by the continued spike in these cases here and nationwide. And nobody wants to shut down anything, but some tough decisions are going to be made. So I had a brief interview with the incoming mayor, and he admitted that the top priorities are trying to handle the COVID situation and the escalating crime, obviously.
So let me ask you, when it comes to handling COVID, is there what can he do that has not been done already?
It's difficult. You had to feel for the outgoing mayor, and he battled with the restaurants and business community. But at some point, you don't want to see these large gatherings in Fells Point or wherever. And you're continuing to see these all around the country. Huge weddings and parties late at night, and Thanksgiving dinners. Or somebody on Twitter wrote, I think it was a doctor or a nurse, that said that they were treating somebody with COVID. They had attended a Thanksgiving dinner with 22 people, and virtually everyone at the dinner now has COVID. So, as a mayor, you can't enact policy. I mean, you want to do whatever you can to stop that spread. And I guess that's what the incoming mayor is faced with.
It just seems a tad ambitious, because I thought that the former mayor, Jack Young, had done or was doing just about everything that could be done, including resisting opening businesses too fast, too soon. So I was just wondering, when he says that COVID will be his top priority, is there something that he can do that the former mayor did not do?
That's a good question. And hopefully out of this news conference, which I believe is taking place right now, we'll hear, what more he can do. But again, as a mayor, you don't want to impose more restrictions on these businesses. And we all know in neighborhoods, the number of family-owned businesses and restaurants that have shut down, and they're not going to reopen because of what happened. So it's tough for a mayor or a governor or anybody to make these decisions, but you just can't allow what has happened in some of these other states, where the governors were very lax in asking people to wear masks, or there weren't any mandates, and the hospitals in those states are just flooded with patients, and that's what you're trying to avoid here.
One last question. Any thoughts on the incoming city council president? I understand that he wrote an op-ed in today's paper. I went through it. Seemed like a good sales pitch, but any thoughts on this incoming city council president, who is just, I think I've read where he paid off whatever lien he had with the Internal Revenue Service? Your thoughts, John Rydell?
Yeah, sure. That's obviously not a good look coming into office when you're, stressing ethics and whatnot. So, he was a member of the city delegation in Annapolis. And of course, you're just one of many people there. So that's a big jump from just being one of 3 delegates in a district now to becoming the city council president, because obviously you're chairing the board of estimates, and a lot of difficult decisions have to be made. So, again, you've covered politicians for many years. They can talk a good game during the campaign. I don't know. We just have to see what they're going to put in place.
Okay. Attorney DeShiel, we see you there. I can see your mind turning on camera. Your thoughts?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. Number one, we've got a public health issue that can only be addressed through political mechanisms. It's the decision as to whether it's schools or restaurants or public buildings is not going to be based entirely upon the assessment of the public health risk of allowing participation at those places or in those events. It's a political decision, and like every other political decision, it's going to be fraught with pros and cons. Of course, the problem, of course, is that we've allowed, even at the local level, we promoted this notion and allowed this idea to be promoted that somehow or another, your choice or your decision as to the public health matter is ultimately a reflection of your political affiliation or your political stand was ill-fated from the beginning. We made a mistake in the beginning by telling people that you only needed to be tested if you were showing symptoms. We made a mistake in the beginning by telling people that we were going to allocate resources to so-called first responders as though the people who perform those jobs are more important overall to us than people who do other things. The whole notion of stratification, the whole notion of assessment of value of people based upon what they do is so misguided. And in part is the reason why we're in the position that we're in today. Because if in fact the resources had been more appropriately allocated, had been more appropriately distributed over time, then we wouldn't have as much strain on the economics of the situation. If all the businesses, small businesses, particularly restaurants, if they had more access to real capital that they could sustain them through all times, including these times, then we wouldn't have this problem. The fundamental problem is there's a few people that have way too much, and there's everybody else who's struggling to keep up. That's the problem. That's the truth of the matter, and that's what's not being faced.
Janet R.C., you work with the challenged population in Baltimore, all races, not just Latino. And I've heard you say out of your own mouth how African Americans have been incredibly helpful to Fundación RC. Your thoughts on the future of Baltimore?
Well, it is a challenge. The Latino community is hurt in many areas, even though they're hardworking people. They were one of the most that were affected in this pandemic. A lot of people work in restaurants, hotels. Some of them have small businesses, cleaning positions. So they were really, really hurt. But in the other side, I see the Spanish bar full of people, no masks. And I'm like, okay, what's going on in here? We need to help each other. And it's been really hard. It's been really hard because a lot of these people they don't have any documents. So when you lose a job, I mean, you become homeless because there's no way that they could receive any benefits from the government or any other kind of helps. So I'm trying to, let me tell you, I reach every single people, every single person who's giving food out there to make sure the single moms are getting their food, but it is really hard. It's a big challenge.
Well, one more question for you, Janet. Have you seen people who you would not otherwise see in line? Have you seen working people, for example? I mean, we know about people who are not working, but have you seen people in line for food that you would not expect needed help?
What was your question again? I lost you for a minute.
Okay. Have you seen people in line who you would not imagine seeing in need of help, of food, of
Yes.
money?
Yes, I mean, let me tell you, I've seen people they have lost their job. They used to work in a hospital. I have few people that used to work at John Hopkins, and they were COVID-19 positive, and they decided to stay home because they didn't want to risk anybody out. But I mean, I was surprised people have lost their businesses, and I was surprised to see a lot of faces.
Okay, China, I'm gonna pass the ball to you and let you run with it. We got to bring in Charles, but your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. So just a couple of quick thoughts. I feel that going to this, since we're talking about COVID, to piggyback on what Ms. Arcee is saying, what Mr. Rydell is saying, maybe one of the things that the new mayor can do that's not currently being done, and I actually think that Mayor Young did a fairly solid job for the city. But maybe one of the things that can be done more is education, because I think that Ms. Arcee is right. When I'm out there on the streets talking with people who are lower income, not getting COVID is not necessarily their most important priority. There are other issues of day-to-day survival that feel more real and more threatening. And so figuring out how do we really kind of get to the people in the streets, encourage them to wear masks, help people understand why it's important to protect themselves. I feel that that education probably could be done more, right? And so teletown halls, you know, just figuring out a way to get to people and to encourage them. That's one thought. I like what Mr. Dashiell is saying about economic equality. That's really what you're talking about. It's addressing this core issue of economic inequality, and that is what Dr. King was actually, I think, assassinated over, right? Because he won equality in voting rights, even though it's taken a long time and still we're working on that actually being equal in truth. But as he transitioned to fight for economic justice and economic equality, that's when he was assassinated. And that work is actually not done. And so I hear what you're saying, and I feel that we have some unfinished business here to do in terms of what Dr. King started, but what really began to fall apart once he was assassinated.
Charles Robinson, senior journalist in Maryland. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Donnie, and good morning to everyone. And sorry, I was working this morning. It's always one of those kind of things where, you know, you get a chance to. It's great to see everybody. Let me start off with that. And you know, I've been appreciating the conversation since I've been on, because I'm actually working on a much larger piece on health disparities in our state and looking at Baltimore. And one of the things that's been very interesting to me, for anybody who is challenged to try and make sense of what's going on, is that we have lost too many people. I'll say that up front. We've lost just too many. I think the other thing is that there are no quick fixes. If you think this vaccination process is going to go smoothly, I just want to remind you today, the company that is doing the vaccine says that there are allergies that are out there for people who suffer from allergies. There is no magic bullet. I've talked to enough clinicians, and we all have questions about what this process will be. It's obvious that the general population is not going to get this, probably not until maybe March, might not even be till April. But even then, you know, we have to follow the science. I get when people say, you know, people have to work and they have to do that. Communities of color all across this state are the ones who are on the front lines. Those are the ones who check you in if you say you have COVID, which means they're exposed more often than anybody else. These are the people who bag your groceries, or, you know, or at the grocery store that you see every day, and you hope, at least I hope that I don't get anything from them and they don't give me anything. Understand, I'm a Black man over 60. I got all kinds of underlying issues. And I'll tell you this, I ain't going out there. I'm sorry. And John, you and I both know that you pick your poison. You know, if it's good, okay, fine. 85% of the time you see me on air or you see me, there's nobody around me, you know, because I just can't, I don't have that luxury. But I think the one thing that is very interesting, because at this hour, as we're talking, the new mayor, Brandon Scott, is having one of the very first COVID press conferences in the city of Baltimore. Think about this. We haven't had a COVID press conference, for almost a month.
Right. That's the thing about education and outreach. That's right.
Right. And it's important.
John, I know you were.
It's if I can, we cannot. The notion that there are some people whose health is more important than other people is completely erroneous, and that's part of the reason why we're in the position we are now. Look, I think I can operate my vehicle safely at 100 miles an hour going down the highway, but I don't have a choice about doing that, because if I exceed 65 in most places, I'm going to get pulled over. I'm going to get a ticket, and I'm probably going to get locked up because I'm going to get in an argument about how fast I was going. Okay, we don't have, but when it comes to public safety, it's not a matter of personal choice. The fact we made a decision as a country, as a nation, a long time ago, that the benefit of all is more important than the benefit to one. You have to wear a mask to protect other people. Period. Whether you want to or not, you have to drive under 65 miles an hour, whether you think you cannot safely operate a car at 75 or not, to protect other people. That is a political decision. It has nothing to do with the science, has nothing to do with anything else. It's a political decision that's been made because it's necessary to protect the public as a whole. And that's what's got lost in the sauce. But it wasn't just lost. It was deliberately mishandled. This whole business of labeling, for example, we throw around terms as though there's a generally accepted understanding of what it means to be liberal, what it means to be conservative, what it means to be these other things. And we use those labels. Once you attach a label to something, what you're really saying is what has credibility and what does not have credibility. Because the real currency in the public domain is credibility. That is the real currency. If I can get you to accept or reject a principle based upon who's saying it rather than what the message is, then I've won you. Then I've won. But this democracy, for example, and I know I'm straying all over the place, but I only got a few minutes here, and I'm not angry, I'm just urgent. This kind of democracy that's premised upon winner take all, this kind of democracy that's premised upon closed primaries, this kind of democracy that's based upon the right of some people to become electors and have those decide who wins. This is the only democracy in the world that doesn't require a coalition to govern. This is the only form of democracy in the world that doesn't require a consensus to promote the public interest, where winner take all. That is fundamentally what reinforces the notion of the allocation of resources. The fact of the matter is, everybody who works ought to be rewarded in sufficient amount to be able to sustain their family. I don't give a damn what the amount is. And the super rich have to put more back into the pot for everybody else. You cannot get blood out of a turnip. And until people start talking about the truth of the matter, the fact of the matter is America has a debt that it has not acknowledged, and therefore it has not paid. And that is a debt to Black people, period. That is a reality. It's never going to go away. It's not going to go away because of grant or philanthropic efforts, or I don't want your gift. I want you to pay your debt. Pay your bill and I'll take care of the rest. And that's the discussion that nobody's willing to have. I'm done.
Anyone care to comment?
I mean, it sounds like Bob is saying that it's about economic equality. And I don't know, John, in your op-ed, you pointed out that Don Fry from Greater Baltimore Committee had said the top two priorities are economic development. One of the top two priorities is economic development. I mean, I don't know. Do we have the sense that that the incoming administration has economic development and economic equality as a top priority, as Bob is saying?
And then we also got to question, China, the credibility of the Greater Baltimore Committee, to Mr. DeShiel's point. Not that he was alluding to them, but I got to pose the question. Don Fry opposed the box when it comes to employment here in the city of Baltimore. Baltimore, a piece of legislation that Nick Mosby pushed along. And
Right.
so you're wondering, is this guy really the one who has, to use Mr. DeShield's term, credibility to discuss what we need?
Well, isn't Calvin Butler now, who's the CEO of BGE, the chair of the Greater Baltimore Committee? I thought that they had a leadership shift.
Yes,
Does
I
he
believe
have
so. Yes.
credibility?
And he's Black.
Does
So whether
he have
Calvin would be
credibility?
different, you know, I don't know, right? Because yeah, he's no automatic credibility based on race. I'm the first person to believe in that.
Yeah.
And being Black means more than the color of your skin too.
Bingo.
That's the other thing.
I agree with
That's
that.
what I mean. That's
Diversity
what I
is
mean.
not just how we look; it is
Right.
also how we
Exactly right.
Right.
We got to define. We got to define our own terms and not throw words around as though there's a generally accepted understanding and a consensus as to what they mean. For example, and I said I was done, but I lied. Okay. For example, this whole concept of so-called HBCU. I dropped the H, and I won't discuss it because I understand as a lawyer the historical significance of the designation of HBCU and where it came from in the law. But I also know that today it is not used entirely to refer to an historical designation. It's used to describe a current situation, which is ongoing, which is to say that the campuses that were once Black schools are now becoming less and less Black. And I understand because I saw what happened during the so-called civil rights movement, that when institutions that are Black become something other than that, we never get them back. We lose them as a basis. We lose the legacy of our own contribution as the basis of educating our own children. What do we give our children? What legacy? What is the foundation that we build upon? Is it a foundation of gifts and grants from those who want to be good people and sleep well at night because they gave $6 million to Johnson Square? Or is it or are we going to teach our children to collect on the bill that's owed, to collect on the debt, because that's ultimately the only way of rectifying the situation. We've got to stop this notion of trying to assess value, of refusing to acknowledge that human beings have a value as human beings, and that the only value they have is what they're worth to me based upon what they can do for me or give to me. We've got to abandon that notion as humanity, as a people. We've got to abandon that, in my opinion.
John Rydell, you've been quiet. I'm wondering, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm trying to take all of this in, and I think it depends on, who you are, where you live, and what your priorities are. Because, as the panelist said, for a lot of people these days, I mean, it's survival. It's did you lose your job? Did you not have a job to begin with? Can you pay the rent? Can you pay the mortgage? Everything else. So, you talk about like quality of life issues in Baltimore, the curbside recycling, removal of trash. I mean, these are all important, but now it comes down to surviving month to month, paying the rent and the mortgage, and not getting COVID. But yes, I think a lot of people in Baltimore, it's just like, okay, that's something that I'll put a mask on. Hopefully I won't get it. But every day when I watch the network news, I mean, I really get more frightened about the long-term health impacts of COVID. It's not just after you get over it in a few weeks or so. So how does that impact me? How does that impact somebody very young? There was an attorney that was interviewed on TV this morning in her 30s, and she's just not the same. And she got COVID back in March. So I think unless you know somebody that had it or you had it, you just don't know. One of the reporters that I used to work with developed COVID over the summer, and she's a lot younger than I am. And she told me about the symptoms, the aches and pains, and she had pneumonia. And I'm thinking, pneumonia? This is a woman, maybe 30 years younger than I am. What are the long-term impacts for her? So these are difficult times and difficult questions. We just we don't have the answers.
John, what are the seniors saying? particularly seniors who are in the workforce? Have you found that seniors have had to leave the workforce?
I think it's, every person is different, I guess. I recently left Fox 45. I was there about 29 years for a variety of reasons. You reach the point sometimes where you need to move on to something else. But yeah, it was on my mind going out and covering protests earlier in the year. And you're down at City Hall, and some people are wearing masks, some aren't. There's not much social distancing. And you're downtown at night doing live reports, and the homeless people wander up to you looking for, I'm not worried about them and my safety, but do they have COVID? We don't. I could have COVID. That's the real danger here. So I think maybe the older you get, the more concerned you are about that, because I remember interviewing somebody in their 20s over the summer, and he said, well, if I get it, I get it, and I'll get over it. And that's a nice kind of a thing to say, because he's thinking it's like the seasonal flu. But will he have long-term implications that may affect his career? This attorney that was interviewed really can't do what she was doing before with brain fog. And I think it's very scary.
Charles, we're going to come to you in a second. I saw you agreeing, but Janet, what about the Latino community? You have explained to me how quite often in the Latino community, people cannot get access not only to health care, but also, like you told me, when Latino women go through a domestic violence situation or anything that might otherwise involve the police, depending on their immigration status, that determines whether or not they can call law enforcement, because to call the police is like getting yourself, put out of the country. So how is healthcare for the Latino community?
Yes, that was one of the issues that we had at the beginning. A lot of the Latino were turned down when they started getting the symptoms and going to the hospital. They would send them to go back home. And there was a case where there was a young girl. She was 22 years old with the symptoms, and she used to work with a lawyer. She went to the hospital. They sent her back, and the lawyer had to pay for the whole equipment in order for her to get service in the hospital. But the other co-worker, there were like 13 people, they were turned back home. They were not served at all. They didn't get seen by the doctor, and this happened a lot. I'm telling you, it is a big, issue in the community, because not only the health service they're not getting, also police department trying to do events with the police department, because a lot of the domestic violence in these cases, they're afraid to call 911 because they don't have any documents. So when they see me working with the community for the last 26 years, and they see me involved with the police department, they get a little bit more confidence, and they come up to me and they testify, and then they get the help through us, and they be able to speak with an officer who speak their language. And that's the idea, to help. I mean, we do understand there's a lot of abuse from the police department, but at the same time, we have those good people. They're there, they have the heart to serve the community, and they're doing their job. So this is what I'm trying to educate the community and let them know you will get the service. You just gotta get, educated in the area, get information, because a lot of them, they don't have an idea of what they're supposed to do. I had a
And for
family
those who don't
who
know,
house got into a fire the other day, and she didn't know about the Red Cross. She didn't know that the cards that they give her, it was to go to a hotel, and they had money on it. So I had to sit down with them and went through the process and guide her to the attorney office. and let her know that, this is a case that probably is going to help you to get your visa U. And she didn't have an idea. I mean, this is a family of 5 children and 5 adults. They were on the street. They didn't have an idea of what to do. But I mean,
Janet,
there's a good way that they could trust me.
I want you to educate us briefly, and I'm coming to you, Charles. Janet, what are the major Latino countries represented in Baltimore?
That's a good question.
We have a lot of Mexican, people from Honduras, El Salvador, and I would say Ecuador, Peru. But the larger would be El Salvador, Honduras, and Mexico.
Okay. Charles Robinson, you've been very patient. I can only imagine what you have to share.
First and foremost, these kind of conversations are helpful because what it does, it lets us all know that we are interconnected, that we're not, that song, No One is an Island, it applies here. The thing that I think all of us hope, at least I know I hope, that there is light at the end of a tunnel. But I also know that we're going to go through some trials and tribulations to get to that light. I know that, there are a lot of questions about this incoming administration in Baltimore City as to what they will and won't be able to do. I think, we've talked about this pandemic and how it's affecting various communities. I appreciated the information about the Latino community. Let me also remind you that there is a large Asian community that has a large Asian diaspora that's having issues. There are seniors, as John has mentioned, that are crushed by what has been happening. And I get this idea of how do we balance economics with health? Because you can't just make a kind of what I call a one peg fits all. I think you got to do a little bit of everything. And I think that you can't just come at this with a kind of like, well, I'm gonna do it holistically, or I'm gonna do it economically, or I'm gonna do it just for a particular community. I think you got to kind of do what I call a 20,000 feet view and look back and say, okay, what's important right now? And if you think about it, what's important right now is that people get made whole both through health and economics. And a lot of that does have to deal with issues of race, and a lot of it has to do with a lot of issues of economics. And we just can't get caught up in what I call, I'm going to blame you for why I don't have. Unfortunately, this is not a new phenomenon. This phenomenon was present in the 60s, the late 60s, early 70s, and it actually goes all the way back to the turn of the century. So I urge everyone to kind of take the 20,000 foot view. How do we balance all of this? And how do we create a society that allows us to move forward as opposed to being regressive?
And in reality, Doni, as you've heard me say, there's only really one question in the universe of human beings, and that is, who decides who decides? If who decides is the real question.
The Baltimore Sun.
That's a problem. if in fact it's a problem. Look, the crabs in the barrel. Look at this. I offer this to you. It's often said that a certain group of people act like crabs in the barrel trying to pull. That's not what's going on. The crabs are not trying to hold one another in. The crabs are trying to hold one another to get out. They understand that the enemy is not each other. The enemy is the basket. The enemy is the basket. That's what's holding everybody down. They're not trying to they're trying to hold on to somebody who's trying to find a way out. Okay. And we keep talking about, look, we're on a boat called the Titanic. We can keep arguing about who sits on what deck or who gets on what chair. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't proceed together, everybody's going down. It doesn't make sense to argue about who's sitting in first class or who's sitting in the back of the plane. When the thing crashes, everybody's going down. Okay. And the fact but there yet must be an orderly process. If I tell you this is the way out and I say you got to fall in line behind me, it doesn't mean I'm better than you. It just means on that day, I see where the direction is we ought to be going. And you got to follow me to get there. We got to understand, and that requires faith and credibility. That requires faith and credibility. We have to have that, and that's what's been torn away from the process. There ought to be a law, for example, that says anybody who's holding political office, anybody who seeks political office and pursues it by means of misrepresenting the truth or the facts to the public ought to be locked up. How quickly do you think our jails would fill up if politicians went to jail for lying? How many cells would we need? How many new beds would we have to offer? But yet we accept it as though it's just a phenomenon of life. It's just part of the deal. No, it's not. We must demand from the people who choose to be, or we say are our leaders, we must demand the truth. We got to stop politicians from saying, well, when I was in the legislature, I did this. You know, that's 500 people there. How many votes did you have to really decay? You only had one vote. So stop saying it's not, you don't have to claim credit for it individually because the credit is not yours. Because when it comes time to fault, you duck. You don't want the accountability or the responsibility, but you want to claim all the credit. That's ridiculous. We got to stop this stuff. Go ahead, Donnie. I'm sorry.
No, you make a great point. A term I hear thrown around in the media today. I heard the same thing when Stephanie Rawlins Blake came into office. Are you ready? I heard the new mayor say transparency. I heard Nick Mosby mention transparency. Stephanie Rawlins Blake talked about transparency. What are they talking about, John Rydell?
That's interesting. You know, Donnie, I have something to say about the incoming city council. You know, when I've covered the council through the years, they would have these meetings and pass a resolution declaring Baltimore a nuclear-free zone, or this and that, or passing resolutions supporting Kerwin. And Charles, as you know, covering the General Assembly, the city council only has so much authority over anything. And so much of it comes from the state level. Mm-hmm. So, you know, resolutions look good, you know, on your Facebook page or something like that. But if you're a new city council member or somebody returning, to me, it's all about constituent service. The you know, you need to have that phone available to take calls from constituents day and night about trash or drug dealers or something like that. That's far more important than passing some resolution declaring Baltimore a nuclear free. I mean, it's, you know, it's, some of it's laughable, but this is, you know, we're in a crisis situation. Baltimore is a, you know, as Donnie, I think you said, a city in crisis. So much of it comes down to constituent service, I think.
Folks, let me just tell you that when John was at Fox, he made it his business to cover the inner city. He came to places that Black people wouldn't come to, and he forever has my grateful response. Well, Charles, you have no problem with North and Betlow, but I was very grateful to see John Rod. China, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what John is saying, because I think that the recent council change to allow the council members to actually make movements in the budget is a good thing. I don't think that the council previously has really had the power to influence things. And because they haven't had that power, I think that it's bred a council that focuses on resolutions and otherwise has not really like shown the curiosity about the budget or how things work, or about markets, or just going kind of to that next level intellectually, or about, you know, just really figuring out how to make the city work, because they haven't had the power to influence it. And so I guess one of my things that I'm very eager to watch and to see is whether having new power to actually influence how the city works is going to lead to council members educating themselves more about what best practices are and what they should be. Both the new mayor and the new council president are coming out strong and heavy as good governance people. And they're leading on that, and so I guess I'm very eager to see to what extent that message is going to be embraced by their colleagues, by everyone.
So
And
let me add one thing to this whole mix. We now have a city administrator. I've worked in several cities across this United States. And many of them have what are called city managers. Those are the people who get their hands dirty and they look at, where the budgetary stuff is. It's going to be interesting to see how this affects how the new mayor will deal with things. We have heard, and I wasn't necessarily thrilled hearing that Nick Mosby, I think it was 700. I can't remember how much money he wanted to spend.
700,000.
700,000. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I think, but let me also say that there needs to be a credible group that can basically crunch the data and the numbers in order to find out if this is a good deal for the city. Doni, you and I have talked about this whole idea of, these abatements. I'm sorry, I hate them. I'll just say that up front. And I think there are ruse, unfortunately, to bring, I don't want to say suspect business, but I look at the Under Armour project, and John, you looked at that Under Armour project, and I know you said, man, that is a lot of money to give up.
And I think word about it today.
Right. And it's the old pay me now or pay me later kind of concept. And but I think you ought to watch this administrator. Obviously, he has the ear of the mayor, and he was hired at the behest of a mayor. All mayors of this city have had people who have done their bidding. It's just a part of the process. But I think it will be interesting to see how, I'd be the first person to say, I don't think right now you want to be spending a whole heck of a lot of money. Okay. Secondly, I would also suggest to you that, yes, everybody wants crime solved. Well, crime doesn't get solved by itself. And I think the other part of that is this idea of this pockets of wealth and pockets of abject poverty. How do you marry the two of those? And where do you get the resources to make things that are bad? I don't know about you guys, but I drive through the city almost every day. I am still appalled at the number of vacant buildings that are in the city that are owned by absentee landlords, and they won't give them up. Well, somebody's got to say, you know what? I'm gonna take the bullet on this one, and I'm gonna start tearing them down. And I bet y'all get somebody's attention.
Charles, let me say this. That again, whether you're talking about Project 5000 or on the O'Malley or the notion that people own properties that were intended to be income producing, but somehow they just sit there and let them fall into the dilapidated condition just because they don't care about them is absolutely ludicrous. If people own properties that are not up to par for people to live in, it's because they don't have the money to correct the condition. I can spend a gazillion dollars picking up properties.
The opportunity to correct it is not valuable enough for them.
Yeah, well, not only that, but listen, if I could spend a gazillion dollars fixing up properties, but if my goal legitimately is to obtain a return, a positive return on my investment, then I've got to be able to provide those to people who can afford to rent or who can afford to purchase. What have I done if I build a Taj Mahal in the middle of a desert? It's not a Taj Mahal that I bet. It's a big empty building that nobody can afford to live in. My point is this, guys. The problem is resources, and there's only one way to solve it. The people who have to give more back to the people who don't. We can't duck that issue. We cannot duck that issue. You're right. You can't. Look, in Baltimore City, the resources that are available are limited because, for the most part, they only come from two sources: either from property taxes or from piggyback taxes. In both cases, legislative action at the state level is required to alter that structure. In both, so we got to do that. We've got to put more money back into the pot. We've got to have a system where if a person goes to work for 40 hours a week, that they earn enough money to sustain themselves and their family. And if we don't do that, nothing else matters. If we don't allow people the opportunity through their own work efforts to earn enough money to support their family, nothing else matters. We've got to, and the only way to fix that is to put more resources back in the pot. Now, those houses that have been torn down since the early 60s or 70s, if we had spent half of that money rehabilitating those properties, we'd have affordable housing now. We actually spent more money. It would have taken us a fraction of the money that was spent to tear the properties down to, in fact, make them habitable at the time that they were available. Instead, what we have is a highway to nowhere called the East-West Highway. What we have is East Baltimore Development, where we moved out a whole community of Black folk, and we left them. Basically, we don't even know where they are now.
Somebody was telling me about Park Heights being developed. There's nobody left in Park Heights.
Right, exactly. So that's what I mean when we got to start defining things. When we talk about what's in the best interest of Baltimore, we got to start talking about what Baltimore are you actually talking about.
So, Bob, what's the third source of revenue? What's the third source of revenue? If not property taxes, if not piggyback taxes, what do you think? And I agree, property tax is my number one issue. I actually think it ought to be slashed. But what is the third source of revenue?
He just said two, I thought.
Right, but I thought Bob was saying that.
Yeah, there really is. Yeah. There really is no other source, because we cannot continue a system which squeezes more and more money out of people who really can't afford it. We can't afford any more red light camera fines. We can't afford any more. What do they call the environmental police and fines for not picking that? Those things don't help ultimately the quality of life. They've just become the revenue generators for the city. And we've also we have to start with redefining what government's purpose is. Government is not in business to be efficient. Government is in business to be remedial. Government is in business to make sure that the people who have an effort get a fair return and a reasonable return for the effort they provide. Who cares? We've got to abandon the notion that somehow or another we got to watch what we spend. Look at what's happening at the federal level. Do you hear Republicans talk or conservatives talking about now how big the deficit is? When's the last time you heard a federal discussion about the size of the deficit? And so it's become completely, it's never been important. The only issue is who you spend the money for and what purpose you use it for. It's never been about how much you spend. It's always been about what you spend it for and who's going to pay for it.
Bob, I want to push back on one thing. And I want to push back on Bob on one thing.
Yeah.
Those houses you claim that could have been rehabbed cannot be rehabbed. Most of them were built in the 40s and the 50s. Wiring in them is obsolete. And you have to tear them down, because in this current environment, the housing stock within Baltimore is like I said, circa 40 and 50. And you're not going to get anybody to buy into that, because literally you have to tear it all down in order to get to what you need. Lastly, and because I unfortunately need to leave here, Donnie, is that, look, all of you are making great points. I know this city has survived worse. Trust me, it has. Henson's book on the city of Baltimore is a great primer on what this city has been through and what it has tolerated and what it is not tolerated. I advise all of you to read it. Matthew Henson's book on the city of Baltimore. I don't always agree with everything in there, but I can tell you this.
Matthew
This
Henson
city
or Matthew
will survive,
Crimson?
and it will
Matthew-
not stop surviving.
You're talking about Matthew Crimson, Johns
Yeah,
Hopkins?
Matthew Princeton. I'm sorry, Matthew Princeton. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Matthew Henson discovered the North Pole. Okay,
I
so
know.
we'll go around the horn.
Understand, y'all. You got me up early, Donnie, and my brain is like trying to catch up. It is Matthew
I apologize. Let's start with Janet.
Princeton.
Let's start with Janet R.C. Your final thoughts. What you'd like to see with the city of Baltimore, and how people can get in touch with you.
Well, actually, you know what? We have a big issues with drug addiction in the Latino community. There's nowhere for these people to go. I get calls every single day. Mental health issues is very hard to people get those services. The crime, that's another issue that we have in the Latino community. I mean, I guess we all have those issues, but the resources, they don't get to the Latino community. It's a lack of education, communication, and also services. For every single issue, mental health issues, drugs, crime. I mean, people come up to me because they don't have the resources. They don't know where to go. And they don't have people who speak the language. So when they have these issues, they just stay home with their hands tied. They don't, no options for them. I do try to guide them. If they're bilingual, they be able to go to the right place. But when they don't speak the language, it's very hard.
Listen, you do a damn good job helping people. Put your phone number out there and help will come your way. Put your phone number out there. Janet R.C. of Fundación Odyssey.
443-990-6048.
One more time.
443-990-6048. If you have any information where they could get this resources, please send me a text and I'd be glad to help them out.
And you still feed people on Thursdays?
I'm still feeding people on Thursday. This year we're having 3 events for Christmas. We're doing one event with the police department in Southeast. We also doing a delivering gift to those who are COVID-19 positive families. And we're also going to have a toy drive in Highlandtown for those people who are going to be driving by.
Janet, we love you so much. You've been helping people for a long time. And I thank you. Muchas gracias, mi amiga. Okay,
Gracias,
China
Dani. Thank you for the opportunity and always looking out for me. I'm telling you. You're one of my supporter in a way. You have done what the Latino leaders haven't done to support me.
Well,
I have a lot of respect for you.
I was going to ask whether there was hope on the horizon. Well, everyone should be interested in focused on this subgroup of our Latino community. Is there an expectation that things would change because Odette Ramos is in office now?
Wow.
Well,
We're praying for a big change.
I'm not sure that she speaks for the Latino community is as diverse as the Black community.
That's right.
So that's saying, does Clarence Thomas speak for all Black people? Hell no.
You're right.
So she's not going to tell her personal thoughts. We wish Odette the best.
We sure do.
But Janet has been on the ground. She's the real deal.
Yeah,
and she ain't running for office. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No limits.
I think, Donnie. First of all, let me say that I appreciate the opportunity even to participate in a discussion like this, because it's not every day that you get to have even a brief discussion with people who are thoughtful and intelligent and committed and dedicated and really want to see change. And so this is refreshing for me to even to start off a morning in this fashion. One of the things we've got to reassess where we look to see what progress really is. The notion that we look to Baltimore City as the leader in revitalization, as a leader in making progress for our communities, is probably wrong. It's probably outdated. If we look across the border now to Baltimore County, we see that Baltimore County has had a black county administrator for some time now, a woman named Stacey Rogers. We see that Baltimore County has a county attorney now who's also black, a young man named James Bennett. We see that Baltimore County has a black director of economic development who came in named Leonard Howie. We see that Baltimore County has a black director of public works, a woman named D'Angelo Watkins. We see that Baltimore County has a black director of its public health named Dr. Gregory Branch. We see, and all of those under a county executive who is not black, named Johnny Oshesky. So look, we've got
Is he running for governor?
He may one day, and if he moves in the direction that he moves in, I'm going to be one of his supporters. He listens. He understands. At least from my interaction with him, he listens and he understands. And Donnie, in the final analysis, it's never been about Democrat or Republican. It's never really been about any of those. Those are distractions. The issue is, do you understand what my problem is, and are you committed to doing what's necessary to fix it for me? And if the answer is negative in either one of those, I'm looking for somebody else. I don't care what your color is. We got to define what it really means. Look, I'm going to say this and I'm going to get a lot of feedback. Right? In the African-American community, there's 3 different subgroups. There's colored. Those are the ones that still have chains on. Those are the ones that Harriet didn't free because they didn't know they were slaves. There's Negroes. That's the colored ones who have PhDs behind their name. They're educated. They're educated, but they're still colored because they got the chains on. And then that's black folk who don't have the chains, but they can't do anything because they're surrounded by coloreds and Negroes. Okay, we have to in our community decide which group we're going to follow, because there is a difference. There's a significant difference. And as I say this, and I'm quitting, you don't have to be white to be a white supremacist. We need to understand that. Anybody who believes that being white means you're necessarily right is a white supremacist. And Donnie, for the benefit of those who don't know it, there are many of white supremacists within the black community.
If someone needs you, number one, what services do you offer? And number 2, your phone number, Attorney DeShield.
410-547-8820. But don't call me if you don't want to hear the truth. Don't do it. Don't do it. I fire clients, okay? You go shop someplace. Donnie, I just turned 72 years old. I'm not going to have another attorney at the wheel, and I don't care. I'm not getting on a train anymore that don't tell me where it's going to wind up. I'm not pursuing an effort anymore to tell me I want to change something unless you tell me what it's going to look like when the change has been made. That was the whole problem with the civil rights movement. Where was it going? What would the world look like when it's finished? I understand. Well, everybody keeps saying, well, we got a lot of work to do. Okay, I get that. Here's a piece of parchment. Here's a slate. Draw me the world as you would have it. Because I don't want to know just how we're going to get there. I want to know where there is.
Next time, when you sign in, Mr. DeShield, and next time I want you to put capital M, capital O, capital F for man on fire. John Rydell, you'll get the final word before we close out. And thank you for joining us. Again, John Rydell, I consider him a friend. When we were going through the fires here in Sandtown, when we were going through the fentanyl, and I mean fentanyl that was attracting people from all over the East Coast, very few people could I call on. I could call on Charles Robinson. I could call Jane Miller. But the one most likely to show up with the camera, John Rydell.
Well, Donnie, thank you for that. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of this panel. It's pretty fascinating. It's going to be tough to top Mr. DeShield. But let me just mention Mary Pat Clark real quick. The reason that I covered her in the early 80s. She was at the Democratic National Conventions that I covered. The reason that she survived and was so popular, I come back to constituent service. You could call her home number and she would answer. And there are too many public officials that
don't answer the damn phone.
They're not accessible, or if you call their cell phone, it says the voicemail is full.
Right.
No, you're a public official.
Right.
And she would put out emails indicating that here's what's happening in my district this weekend. What's happening? whatever it might have been. That's really critical. So,
recently,
yes,
she does that now.
Yeah. And so that's important. I mean, the COVID is a long-term recovery. I think the second half of this year is going to be much better. But everybody has to take the vaccine. You can't have 50% of the people taking it. But again, it comes back to constituent service. The people who are elected, and some of the legislators in the city, they're pretty accessible as well. But they need to promote what's going on in their neighborhood. They need to promote businesses and restaurants that are still open, and encourage people to patronize them, because you don't want any more businesses shutting down.
Good deal. Folks, that don't have to be it all. I see I'm not the only one with dog and security, but we thank you for joining us, and have a great and beautiful day.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Jake, shut up. Bye.